all you beautiful people out there, what is going on? This is your friend Birdie coming at you fast with another Paragon video, and today we are going to be looking at how to build a custom deck from the ground up. And making this video, I'm intending this video to be for a variety, a plethora, if you will, of skill levels of all varieties of people, whether you're bronze, silver, potato, plastic league, it doesn't matter, platinum league even, diamond maybe, I don't fucking know, maybe you can get some inspiration from this video, you never know what might happen. It's 2016, am I right? And I just wanted to make this deck building video to show you guys kind of my thought process behind building decks, especially since we now have this custom deck event starting today, Tuesday, 1st of November. Happy November, everybody. And by the way, we still have Thanksgiving. If you're one of the people who is starting to celebrate Christmas as of today, I fucking hate you, okay? No, I'm just kidding, but still, that's kind of weird. Like, we still have Thanksgiving. Like, what the actual fuck? Like, I have people, there's literally people already decorating the cars as reindeers as we speak, like, outside. Like, I could probably peer out my window and see some people there, just fucking, I don't know, I don't fucking know, like putting Christmas trees like in their windows already. It's bad. But anyway, let's go to the decks, okay? So we're gonna make a deck from the ground up. And the first thing that I do when I'm making a deck, let's say we're going to go with Howitzer. Let's use Howitzer as an example. My boy Howitzer here, best caster in the game, confirmed at this moment in time. Fuck everything else. I don't care what anyone says. Howitzer is definitely a top tier caster. Advanced, but very good. And the first thing you look at when you're building this deck is always take a sneak peek at the little bars right here. Now, a lot of people discredit these basic attack, ability, power, durability, mobility numbers, but actually they are helpful. Now, obviously, Howitzer is a caster, so his ability power is going to be the majority of his damage. His basic attacks aren't going to be dealing too much damage. But the thing with Howitzer that you should also know is you should also understand his moves, and that's the very first thing. I don't want you guys starting at the deck building screen when you're building your decks. I want you guys to start at this screen, and I want you to go to the abilities tab and learn these abilities of the heroes first. You build the decks around the heroes and around their abilities and around their playstyles and around their function within the team comp. So Howitzer has a lot of crowd control when it comes to his slow mines and his landmine that can bounce enemies all over the place. It can bounce him all over the place too for escapes. And he's got a lot of burst damage when it comes to his missile and his ultimate, which is one of the strongest ultimates in the game. If you can get them inside the radius for that last missile, it deals an insane amount of damage. And once you get better, you can start using landmines to bounce them into the missiles themselves. If you're not that good yet, you can always pair up with a Decker or a Fae or a Steel and combo your ults to make sure you get that off. But basically, the takeaway from this is realize that, hey, Howitzer has a lot of crowd control, okay? And he's pretty darn good at dealing a lot of damage real quick, too. So we're going to emphasize our damage, we're going to emphasize mana, and we're going to emphasize some durability and some survivability on him as well. But in what order and how are we gonna build this? So let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead, I'm not even gonna fucking rename that shit. We're just gonna go ahead and start off from scratch, and we are gonna go with the Archmagus card for Howitzer, because again, he is a caster. We want him to deal a lot of damage. We want him to be really good for wave clear. That's his number one priority as a caster, is wave clear and crowd control secondary. As you know, a caster that has those mines and those slows, he's really good with crowd control in team fights, so that's his secondary purpose in the game. Okay, so we're going to go with the Archmagus for some energy damage here. Now, how do we start with Howitzer? Well, if we know that, hey, okay, he's got a lot of damage up front in the beginning with his abilities, with his missile, especially when you level that stuff up, we want to focus damage in the beginning. So we always start with the health pot, always, or some sort of other form of health regeneration. It doesn't really matter, but health potion is the default. So that's just what we're going to go with. And I like starting with 2 cast tokens on him as well, okay? Now, a lot of people probably would like a mana potion instead of one of those cast tokens if they seem to be using their abilities to last hit a lot. But with Howitzer, I feel like with those 2 cast tokens, if you get good at last hitting, you don't really need it, okay? And that's kind of my ideology there. If you really do need help with the last hits, though, and you need to use his long-range missile to get those last hits, then have a mana potion on deck. But in the beginning, as a caster in the laning phase, you shouldn't really be using your abilities much anyway, unless you're trying to push a wave right before backing. So that's why you can go with 2 cast tokens. That's kind of my theory right there. So again, This isn't directly looking at a build for Howitzer. This video is supposed to analyze how you guys should think when making a deck. So again, my philosophy, my theory here is that, hey, Howitzer is really good early damage because he's a caster, so we're going to build some more damage. Now, the first card that you should typically 99% of the time build is a ward. And the great thing about wards in Paragon, unlike other games like League of Legends, you actually get a full upgrade bonus for building a ward. You actually get just about the same amount of bonus when it comes to damage. You get the same amount of bonus when you fully upgrade it, as you guys can see by that fully upgraded bonus. So we're going to go ahead and put in 3 minor casts because we want to be dealing as much damage as we can. We want some mana, like I said earlier in the beginning, to use his abilities in case we do get in a team fight. And having that ward so we don't get ganked when we're in mid lane or sometimes in solo lane. Now, we do want a bit more damage. This is a good amount of damage, but we still want a little more, and we want a little more mana. So usually, I go with Amp Crystal here, and again, 3 more minor casts. Now, I know here comes the problem with deck building is that, oh, I don't have that many 1-point cards, or I don't have too many cards that you use, Britick. I don't know what to use in substitution. Just try your very best. If you can't build early cards, and by early cards, I mean 1-point upgrade cards, perfectly, then go ahead and go to medium cards and use 2-point cards instead if you really can't. But the most optimal situation is having these 1-point cards for your early game deck for sure. So under optimum situations, we're going to go ahead and say, hey, we have another 3 minor casts. We're going to put it in the Amp Crystal, and we're going to get some more mana. So like I said, early game, Howitzer's really good with damage, so we have plenty of damage now. 6 points of upgrades into 2 cards that both give damage and give some bonus stuff when they're upgraded. Amp Crystal gives a lot of mana when fully upgraded, so now we have our damage and our mana covered. Now we want to move into our mid-game survivability, and we're still going to be using these 1-point cards. The very important thing that a lot of people don't realize is that you can actually trade in cards and trade out cards at specific times in the game to your liking. And when you have cards such as, oh, I don't know, where's Tempered Plate? There it is, Tempered Plate, with 3 lesser healths in there for some health, and then you get that full upgrade bonus armor early game, which is super nice. Nobody builds 66 points of physical pen that early in the game at 12 CP. When you have cards like Tempered Plate and Toon Barrier with lower health, they're always going to be useful, but they can also easily be traded out for higher level versions of the same cards. So, usually when building a deck, you want to have anywhere between 2 to 4 quote-unquote early game cards. These are cards that are usually going to have 1-point upgrades, or in total are going to total 6 points. So notice I have the 3-point Amp Crystal with 3 points of minor casts in total, giving me a total of 6 points for this one card. And that's what I mean by early game cards. Now, mid-game cards are usually 9-point cards, which are 3-point cards with 3-2 upgrades, or 2-point cards with 2-2 upgrades and 1-3 upgrade, and, give you a total of 9 points in one card, and late-game cards are 12-point totals. So now we can start moving into our mid-game point cards. Now that Howitzer has a decent amount of damage and he has a decent amount of health and survivability, we could start trading in for mid-point cards or adding in mid-point cards. And this depends on how many early game cards you have. If you have a lot of early game cards, then you can even skip that and go straight into later game cards by substituting this total 6-point card and trying to get a 12-point card. Let's say if you back with 6 points. Of course, this game is super situational and there's no straight formula to building anything depending on the situation, but let's say that you're in a really good spot right now. So later down the road, you can replace that Amp Crystal with 3 minor casts for an Amp Crystal with 3 major casts instead. You get the same upgrade bonus, but now your damage is a bit more caught up with everything else, okay? Now, okay, great, you replace this, but, oh my gosh, what's going on now? I need more survivability. So, a mid-game card, for example, would be something like Elder Mage Amulet with, lesser health, greater health, or if you don't have, enough lesser health, you can go with 3 2-point cards. Building this way is just a bit easier, okay? It prevents, having odd cards out and such and stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and link that in there too. Again, I'm not really building these in very particular order. I'm just telling you guys that, hey, start with early game cards, move into mid game cards, but if the situation's in your favor, you can even sneak in a late game card in there right off the bat anyway, okay? Now that we've got a pretty darn gosh good setup here, we can go ahead, I don't know why I switched over to that accent, but we can go ahead and replace our early game temper plate and tune barriers for later game temper plate and tune barriers by, making sure we're doing our math right. And of course, we always do our math right because we know how this shit be. We can even do it in a kind of a different way, okay? If you don't want 3 major guards and 3 major barriers, like we usually do, then what you could do is another alternative, okay? Is you can, instead of getting that Elder Mage amulet first, you can go ahead and either replace the tempered plate with 3 2-point guard plates. So for example, get another temper plate in here that has something along the lines like this. Okay, 6 points worth of guard upgrades in there. And then you can also have a tune barrier to replace the other one, which again, minor barrier, barrier, greater barrier. Okay, like that. 6 points right there. So these are examples of mid-game cards as such. And then you can have the Elder Mage amulet be a later game card instead, and just put 3 greater healths in here. 3 greater healths in there instead. And so now we're ending up with a good solid deck here with 12 points here. Now we have 24. Now we have 30. Now we have 39. Now we have 48. And that leaves us with another 12 points that we could spend somehow if we would like. So let's go ahead and make sure we did our math again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 cards. We need 1 more card to make sure that this is a complete deck. That's going to add up to 12 points. Okay, that's something that we want to do. And like I said, we want damage, we want mana, we want survivability. We got the health and armor for survivability. We've got some damage and some health here. And we could probably just go on ahead and now add some penetration to aid us in our damage conquest. Sheffield, you already know what I mean. You already know what I'm saying. So we can add some penetration. So we can go ahead and have something like a meltdown for late game when people already have a lot of penetration and stuff like that. Or we can go ahead and just add a little bit. I mean, you can do it in a variety of ways, but as you notice, one thing that does come into play is the amount of cards that we can have. So what ends up happening is you actually have to make a pretty gosh darn particular deck if you're going to be building up to this kind of deck status. You have to make sure that you have enough space for everything that you want to do. And with this kind of deck, with 3 focus shocks, we have about 144 here, 16 there. We have about 160 energy pen, which is usually pretty decent. If you think that's too much, you can take one away, put a major cast instead. But for the time being, we're going to go with 3 pen. And there we go. 40 out of 40. Perfect deck. We got 6 cards. We got max CP utilized. And boom, we've got our early game cards that are 6 points in total. We've got our mid game cards that are 9 points in total. And we have our late game cards that are 12 points in total. And there is your Howitzer deck. Now, let me compare this to the Howitzer deck that I already had, and it's most likely going to be very similar already. This is the deck that I will showcase in my video, and again, you see 40 out of 40, pretty goddamn similar deck, okay? Pretty gosh darn similar. The only difference here is that I messed up on my math right there. I mean, I didn't mess up. It's still 6-point upgrades, but I'd rather go with these kind of upgrades instead and makes things a little easier. And boom, there we go. We literally have the same exact deck, except for the meltdown. I have an extra damage in here just because I like dealing more damage, yo. I'm not a big fan of going too much pen on casters. I feel like this is a good amount of pen for him. But, that's just me. Again, it's all situational. So there you guys have it. Hopefully you enjoyed. I know this was a kind of a longer video, but this was as in-depth as I could possibly make it. People always ask me, how do you build decks? What is your mindset? What do you do? To recap, look at the hero's strengths and weaknesses. Focus on 2 main strengths. For Howitzer, it was his crowd control, and it was his burst damage early game especially. And that is what allowed us to make this deck. That is what guided us in making this deck and the cards that we used. Knowing that, we made sure that we had an early deck with cards that had 1-point upgrades, a mid-game deck with some 2-point upgraded cards in there for a total of 9 points, and then we had some late-game cards that total 12 points each, such as Elder Mage Amulet, comment, and that is how you can make a good solid deck that will last you throughout the entirety of the game. Make sure you're not too behind, make sure you are not falling behind the enemy, and making sure that you are prioritizing the right things in the right moments of the game. When in doubt, build damage first, build sustainability later, unless you're going super duper tank mode, and even then, build just a little bit of damage. Build like one card with 3 minor casts or minor strikes in there, and then go tank. But as a fallback, usually you're going to build damage in the beginning, unless you're a full-on support, like a Muriel, for example. But anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I did have to, put a little bit of time into knowing how I was going to phrase this, and I hope it really, really cleared up some things. If it really just confused you even more, I'm sorry. But if it did help, make sure you drop a like, comment. Howitzer is a crazy mofo if you got to this point in the video. And as always, make sure y'all have a wonderful day. Peace.